Thank you, everyone, very, very, very much for being here. I appreciate you sharing your Saturday morning with us. My name is Sarah Roos. I'm chair of the Children's Caucus of the California Democratic Party. We are so honored to have these guests here today. Dr. Diane Ravitch, Superintendent Mary Nicely, Honorable Dave Jones. I think I will just dive in. Let me first of all just note that this conversation will be recorded. If that's an issue for you, perhaps you can turn your camera off or even put up a different name if that concerns you. The other thing I want to note is that we will try to address as many questions as possible, and we ask that you put those in the chat so we can try and organize them together. People are muted, but we hope to be able to ask you to ask your questions, and then we will ask to unmute at that point. I just also want to thank our whole caucus executive team. They're in the background doing logistics. Our communications team, Nelson Tam, Amini Sanati, and Liz Kane. Our officers, Matthew Hilliard, Ann Crosby, Tiffany Sickler, Abba Nagisa. They are in the north, the south, they're behind spreadsheets in their computer, and our election chair and our civility exemplar, Corinne Sia. She'll be scanning the chat and leading by example. I want to introduce our guests. Dr. Diane Ravitch is former Assistant Secretary of Education from 1991 to 93, an outspoken critic of the privatization movement in education. An education historian, prolific and very supportive blogger, she is co-founder of the Network for Public Education, an advocacy group to preserve, promote, improve, and strengthen public schools for both current and future generations of students. Chief Deputy State Superintendent of Instruction Mary Nicely is with us. Her professional perspective can lead us to understand what precisely is at stake for California's children when Project 2025 threatens elimination of the Federal Department of Education. There are practical implications to this manifesto that every canvassing activist needs to know as we hit those doorsteps. Honorable Dave Jones, our former California Insurance Commissioner, has joined us. He's the current director of UC Berkeley's Climate Risk Initiative at the Center for Law, Energy, and the Environment. Medi-Cal is the state's health insurance program for 3 in 7 of California's children. Economic alterations to it would have severe implications for the more than 5 million minors this program serves. We'll hear from him about some of these impacts. So welcome all. Thank you very much. Nelson, could you please spotlight our guests? And in the upper right corner, if you're not familiar, our members of the Zoom can fiddle how you see the guests, how they appear on your screen. Our first question, I'm just wondering of the panelists each, from your professional perspective, is there one specific or a set of proposals promoted by Project 2025's mandate for leadership that you worry particularly affects children's well-being? Dr. Ravitch, could we start with you, please? Thank you.
Sure. I see, as many people do, a very nefarious future under this proposal, and I think it's actually, we're very lucky that they published it. I don't think that Donald Trump is happy about it, but nonetheless, it's an alarm to all of us about what they have in mind. They're not talking about the future. They're not even talking about the past. They're talking about dismantling the Department of Education. And to me, what's more important than the Department of Education is Project 2025 really wants to end federal aid to education. If you go deep into the rhetoric of this chapter, which was written by someone who, as far as I can tell, has never been a teacher or an administrator or any role in the Department of Education, the proposal is to eliminate federal aid, period. It's, first of all, voucherized, but then after it's voucherized, not only is federal aid to education diminished and then eliminated, but the student higher education, the awards to students for scholarships and for federal aid, those will disappear too. So they're really talking about a dramatic retrenchment. And if you want to say that they're trying to go back, they're probably going back a century in terms of federal support for education, both higher education and K-12 education.
Thank you. Superintendent Nicely?
So in just practical terms, and thank you, Diane, for saying those words, that they'd like us to go back in time. And the things that I'm particularly worried about are, outside of Project 2025 as well, the Republican Party has looked to just abolish the free and reduced lunch programs for our kids. And California, of course, has universal meals, but much of that is based on federal aid. And we're talking about over 3.5 million of our kids that qualify and are eligible for free and reduced lunches. So I'm not exactly sure how they plan on dealing with that. But that is a nationwide issue that would impact our kids even being able to eat. And I'm not sure how you actually learn when you're hungry. The other things that I'm worried about is the special ed and the IDEA funding that would be taken away. In practical terms, California received $23 billion in federal funds last year to supplement the over probably about 140 billion of state funding. So 23 billion is a huge hit to the state for our most vulnerable students, and especially our special ed students. And of course, at the end of the day, the fights that we've been having pretty much every day would be the whole idea around making our schools more traditional and really taking away the fact that schools are a safe haven for many of our LGBTQ kids and our kids that are homeless and foster youth. And so, there's three very, very top of mind things that are very dangerous about allowing Project 2025 to move forward.
Thank you. Mr. Jones?
So there's a lot to be very concerned about in Project 2025. I'm going to focus on its impact on public healthcare programs, in particular the Medicaid program, or what we call Medi-Cal in California, and the Affordable Care Act. So just to context set, in California, we have about 15.28 million Californians on Medi-Cal, or what they call federally Medicaid. So that's about a third of our state's population. And nationally, there are about 79.9 million Americans on Medicaid or the Children's Health Insurance Program. So also to context that, the Affordable Care Act covers about 1.78 million Californians through our covered California Health Benefit Exchange. And across the country, there are about 20 million Americans enrolled in health benefit exchanges under the Affordable Care Act, which is the highest enrollment since the inception of the program. And Project 2025 and the future Trump administration, if there is one, are really pointed like a dagger at both these critically important programs, which are necessary for children and families' health. So on the Affordable Care Act side, Project 2025 does a number of things to try to undermine the Affordable Care Act, including getting rid of all of the consumer protections that were put in place for things like pre-existing conditions and annual and lifetime caps, and placing limits on profit taking by health insurers versus putting money into healthcare. On the Medicaid side, or Medi-Cal, it's also pointed like a dagger at that program. One of the long-sought Republican or conservative objectives with regard to the federal Medicaid program is to try to block grant the program or impose a per capita cap. And Project 2025 talks explicitly about doing either of those things. So just to understand the way Medicaid works currently, it's a federal-state partnership where, subject to a percentage participation by the state and by the federal government, which is called FMAP, there is no cap in terms of the outlay of the federal government. So if you have more poor families and more poor children who need health care who have to get on your Medicaid program or Medi-Cal program, there isn't some limit on enrollment or limit on the amount that the federal government will participate in the program. What Project 2025 proposes is to place a cap by block granting the federal dollars, and then at the same time limiting the amount of federal dollars that would be provided to each state, and limiting the percentage share that the federal government participates in each state. So give you some idea of that, which is referred to as FMAP, which is the federal participation level. Mississippi, which has a very large poor population per capita, well, about 79% of their Medicaid program is paid for by the feds, right? So that would drop precipitously under this Project 2025 program. So for California, and we can get further into the weeds, but there's a number of other provisions that would be like a dagger at the heart of California's Medi-Cal program. California relies on provider taxes to fund in part its share of the Medi-Cal program. And one of those taxes is actually on the ballot this year, which is the tax on managed care organizations. In any event, Project 2025 would prevent states from using provider taxes to cover their state share of the Medi-Cal or Medicaid program, which would also effectively dismantle the program in any state that relies on that. It also would eliminate a whole host of different beneficiary protections and requirements, create more red tape for enrollees, impose work requirements on enrollees, a whole host of things that would effectively undermine Medicaid and Medi-Cal. So the net result of both of these attacks on the Affordable Care Act and Medicaid or Medi-Cal is literally tens of millions of people across the country, including tragically children, would be without health care and access to health care. So it's a terrible thing, and we should do everything in our power to prevent it from coming into being.
I have to say, I am floored. It is far worse than I understood. I mean, my understanding of states' rights and the tussle between federalism and the federal power and the state's power, I did not understand that the federal jurisdiction could limit what states actually then subsequently do. If I understand you correctly. Let me ask, and note to everyone, actually, we should put into the chat the link for the document itself, which is over 900 pages. I'll do that in a moment. Chapter 11 particularly is on education. That's in pages 319. It forwards, it's actually very well organized, which is helpful. It forwards several core principles, which if you blink and look at these from another light, they are actually very helpful for understanding what's scary going on. They wish to advance educational choice, restricting federal regulation of education funding, which is analogous to what Mr. Jones was just saying, commodifying federal student aid of particular interest to Dr. Ravitch, defining civil rights to be centered on family, what they define as a family rather than an individual priority. These civil rights are devoid of historical context. That's the purpose of eliminating CRT and attacking DEI. That kind of context is anathema. These civil rights are unconcerned with gender. They are also religiously determined. I wonder if you would each of us speak to us how your work with or on behalf of children is threatened by these kinds of principles of market choice, anti-regulation, commodification, cultural absolutism. Please, Dr. Ravitch.
Okay, unmuted. I think that there's a curious contradiction at the heart of the education section. On the one hand, they want to get the federal government out of the business of funding education, but this chapter is laced with ideas about how the federal government can stop anything that in any way benefits kids who are LGBT. And they want at one time to emasculate and eliminate the department. And I wonder how they intend to carry out all their nefarious plans to make the schools unwelcoming to kids who are different from what their ideal is, which is, white middle-class kids. I think that, I have mixed feelings about the department itself, having worked there, because the department has done so much damage, even under Democratic control. And I'm thinking now about Arnie Duncan, and before Arnie Duncan, Margaret Spellings and Rod Page. And I guess that there's a part of me that wishes there were a Department of Education that didn't have a Secretary of Education, or a Secretary of Education who was a strong supporter of public schools, which is where 85 to 90% of our kids are. But we have seen the damage that can be done even by a Betsy DeVos, an Arnie Duncan, and so on. But I think that what matters most is that the funding streams are absolutely vital. And I don't see how they're going to be able to do what they want to do, which is to use those funding streams and to prevent anything woke from happening in the schools, and at the same time remove any federal benefits to the schools, or any federal dollars. And I think once the states are on their own, the inequality in this country will dramatically increase. We already have very broad inequality. I mean, an earlier speaker talked about almost 80% of the kids in Louisiana needing federal funding for healthcare. I would think that in some states, which have, by the way, rejected any kind of Medicaid support for ideological reasons, we're talking about states where the poverty will become dramatically greater if this horrible plan should ever come into effect.
Thank you. Superintendent Nicely?
Yeah. So, and Diane, again, I mean, I think we kind of have a merger of brains here. It's like, yeah, even under Democratic administrations, so much could have been done, have not been done. But I think there's an ideology and a core value that is totally based on people just not being better than, people are better than other people from the day they're born. There's just this whole idea that is just mind-boggling to normal human beings, like maybe hopefully the people that I'm on with, that everyone should be given a fair shot. But there is just a belief that why do you need federal higher ed loan? If your family didn't save or didn't have enough money to send you, well, then don't go to college. I shouldn't be giving you my money to do that. We've been fighting this battle with LGBTQ plus kids for 3 years. We've sponsored legislation. We just sponsored another piece called SAFE Act, which now prevents a school from outing kids, right? But even here in California, we have school boards that have been curated by the Republican Party. And people just don't, and we'll talk about this later, really, but they just don't really understand how all politics is local when it comes to those kinds of decisions that are being made. But the hypocrisy of state rights when we want it and not when we want it. We want to control you, but yeah, here, let these other people control you with the privilege they have in that state. And so, so we continue to fight with the fact that, you're going to use CRT, you're going to use DEI. We came out with an ethnic studies model curriculum last year that we were just beat up on, which had to do with just lifting up kids. That's not CRT. We want kids of color to see people who look like them that have been successful and have been doing things. But really I think Mr. Cardona has actually been a pretty fair secretary, but I will say under Arnie Duncan, there was a lot of damage made. I read back when under Reagan, where his Secretary of Education, they wanted to eliminate. And whoever that secretary is, whose name I can't remember now, he pretty much he said, oh yeah, great idea, until he actually started paying attention to the importance of the federal Department of Education and really stalled, for the entire time he was there. So Reagan couldn't get through elimination of the department. So there is a lot of work to be done at the federal level. Right now, we're just fortunate we have, a governor and a state superintendent and a legislature that believe in public education. But even then, that's a little, it's a little dicey sometimes for us. But that's the fight that we have pretty much every day to protect these kinds of things and protect our kids and our communities from these crazy ideas that are just so dangerous.
Thank you. Mr. Jones?
So I want to pick up on your question about state rights. And as one person said in the chat, they care about states' rights when it matters to conservative philosophy, but when it doesn't, they abandon state rights. But the way that they're proposing in Project 2025 to leverage any federal dollars that might be left and remaining is by essentially attaching conditions to the state's uptake of any of the remaining federal Medicaid dollars, and then using those to leverage into other important policy protections that California has. So one of the Project 2025 proposals is not just to cap Medicaid or the federal share of Medi-Cal, and we get about $85 billion a year in federal assistance for the Medi-Cal program. So let's say they cap that in half and we get, 42.5 billion. We don't have 42.5 billion lying around to backfill that federal cut. And what that will end up doing then is pitting children's health care against children's education in the state budget, right? Which I think is a part of what they're trying to do. But even say they cut our $85 billion down to 42.5, then what they're proposing is to condition our taking that 42.5 on things like changing our state laws, which require coverage for abortion in private commercial health insurance, or changing our state laws with regard to providing state funding for Planned Parenthood, or any number of the things that we have in state law that provide more expansive protections for healthcare access and reproductive health and serving all sorts of marginalized populations. Project 2025 proposes not only to reduce the federal assistance and basically gut Medi-Cal, but then whatever crumbs are left to us, they'll drive conditions that will limit the ability of California, if we take the federal money, to do important things to try to protect marginalized communities, including children. One last example of this in the Affordable Care Act. So one of the important features of the Affordable Care Act is that states have the option under the Affordable Care Act to essentially expand their Medicaid programs beyond the bare minimum coverage. And we've chosen to expand Medicaid, take advantage of that, and expand Medicaid to cover single adults. And the feds under the current Affordable Care Act pick up 90% of that cost. The Project 2025 proposes to get away with that, get rid of that. So that would limit our ability to cover single adults. And it would also propose to impose conditions on whatever Medicaid dollars are left to us with regard to things like where we've decided to cover undocumented children and undocumented persons generally using our own state dollars. Well, they would leverage our taking any federal dollars to say, no, you can't do that even with your own state dollars. So it's a disaster from a healthcare standpoint, but the healthcare provisions also have implications for the ability of the state to continue funding education because they cut federal assistance for children's health care in a way that will pit a state budget healthcare needs against education needs.
This use of conditioning federal funds, is that of long standing? Has the government done this a long time? I was unaware of it until recently.
Yeah, I mean, it's used for good and for ill, right? So I mean, when there are Democratic administrations, we put conditions on federal funds to try to make good things happen, and when there are Republican administrations, they put conditions on federal dollars to make bad things happen. But yes, there's a long-standing history of conditionality. Sometimes the courts decide that conditionality has gone too far. So remember, in the version of the Affordable Care Act that was first enacted, states were required to expand their Medicaid programs in various ways, and the Supreme Court said, "Well, that's too much. We're not gonna allow that." One other point, while I have the floor, many of you probably saw the Tim Walz, J.D. Vance debate, and to hear J.D. Vance talk about the Trump administration trying to protect the Affordable Care Act is such revisionist history that I started screaming at the TV. I mean, I spent 4 years as the state's insurance commissioner fighting the Trump administration's efforts to undermine the Affordable Care Act, including, in Congress where the Republicans, but for John McCain's vote, wanted to repeal it in its entirety. But throughout that administration, they did everything they could administratively to try to blow up the act. So folks shouldn't be fooled about where Trump stands with regard to the ACA and Medicaid. He's going to try to undermine both.
So I'm mindful that Dr. Ravitch told me, and I have kept these words in front of my head for the last week: be practical, be practical. We're here as activists who are going to be knocking doors and trying to convince strangers in 5, 8, 20 words of this threat. So I wonder if we could just do a quick round robin where you summarize what you just said in a way that somebody could use to try and convince. We're all here convincing. This is preaching to the converted. Somebody who is skeptical or apolitical and unaware. Dr. Ravitch.
Well, I think that what would be most persuasive, and my experience has been that people who support Trump are not open to persuasion because they will always come back with, but he cares about me, which makes no sense. What would be most persuasive is to talk about the things that they rely on, the federal programs they count on, like Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, free lunches for kids at school. And unless people are actually getting that for their own kids, they don't care. But they do care about Social Security and Medicare. And I think that it's important to talk to people's self-interest, which they seem to be ignoring by being frightened about the hordes of immigrants coming across the border and murdering people and stuff like that. He deals in fear, as does J.D. Vance. And I think that what bothers me is in this whole conversation is we both live in irrelevant states. I mean, you should be sending caravans of people to Nevada to talk to voters in Nevada. Good. Because, given our crazy electoral system, there are only 7 states that are going to determine this election, and it's going to have an impact on all of us. So send people to Arizona, send people to Nevada, and I'll do the same for Pennsylvania.
To be perfectly honest, California is a big place, and as with the whole city, a whole country, which turns out to have 5 states that have a huge urban population and are blue and everything else is rest, the same is recapitulated in California. We have in our centralized urban spots, those are blue, but there's vast stretches of California, even though we don't matter in terms of the electoral college, we do in terms of federal representatives and all the way down to school board. And so there is plenty of work to do right here in California.
Well, there is work to do in the sense that you've got a lot of congressmen who should be replaced by others.
Exactly.
Because even if Kamala Harris is elected, if she has no control of the House or the Senate, nothing she wants to do can be done.
It's the nightmare. Ms. Nicely, Superintendent, do you want to encapsulate for the doorstep?
Sure, but I do just want to add on to the fact that I do agree with Diane. I had a desperate call from someone in the Democratic Party in Nevada this week saying, Mary, please, we need people coming out to Nevada, because I will say again, Project 20, I talk a lot about all politics are local. This presidential campaign, this is incredibly critical. So I think we just absolutely need to figure out who can go to Nevada, because we would not have had turn Nevada blue in 2008 if we had not gone out in the thousands. So I just want to say that. So this is what I would say. And this is what I say to people all the time. And again, it's like people care about certain things when they have to receive those services. Sometimes they don't care about those, but we do need to know who we're talking to and know our audience when we're going out and who we are campaigning for. If we are knocking on a door for a particular candidate, we need to know what they actually believe in as well, because that's going to be critical. And so these, it's just not knocking on doors, it's actually understanding what you're talking about and who you are campaigning for. So as an education person, what I often will tell people is during the pandemic, it became clear that public schools have been the safety net for children, families, and entire communities. In California, public schools served over 1 billion meals to students and their families, provided childcare for essential workers, and public schools and libraries provided internet access to keep students learning and connected families to healthcare and other necessary services. Now California leads the nation, providing universal meals, universal preschool, has established a plan for broadband for all, with K-12 education front and center. Project 2025 and the Republicans would jeopardize all the progress made by the state cutting off essential funding to keep these programs in place. We must protect these critical resources and vote against Project 2025 to ensure our children and communities continue to thrive. And so for me, that is, I think, something really important, but we do need to understand who we are campaigning for, and hopefully they believe in that. And I know in some of our purple districts, maybe that's not necessarily the case. So even with our Democrats. So I would be very mindful of that and ask people if they talk about schools, because I saw a couple of my friends from that are teachers and principals and school districts on, ask them how their kids' school is doing. You could think our public education system is a dumpster fire, but it's actually not. You ask parents how they feel about their kids' school and they're very happy. So I think we need to really understand who we are campaigning for. So that's like 15 seconds still. So maybe somebody can say it or put it in ChatGPT and make it short.
Mr. Jones.
So what I say at the door in Nevada is Donald Trump is going to take away your access to healthcare and healthcare protections for you, your kids, your parents, your friends, your neighbors, and your coworkers. And the way he's going to do that is by gutting Medicaid, limiting Medicare, undermining consumer protections in the Affordable Care Act, and returning us to the bad old days where all we had was health insurance from private insurers who limited how much coverage we could get annually, limited how much coverage we could get overall, and denied us health care if we had a pre-existing condition. And like Diane and Mary and everyone on this call, I would encourage folks to go to Nevada from California. I'm getting a car at 10 o'clock after this to drive to Reno to knock on doors. I did it last weekend. There's tremendous opportunities to get involved through the Nevada Democratic Party or some of the local county level Democratic Party apparatus as well. But we need you to go to Nevada from California.
Does it Arizona work, or is it?
Yeah, I'd go to Arizona too. Sorry.
No.
I'm up
So-
north, so yeah. So let me
It's a
leave that.
serious question.
Let me encourage Arizona too.
Okay, good. I refuse to sort of doom. I mean, it's not even doom scrolling. There's no scrolling. It's like diving into these polls and the figures. So I don't know where the hot spots are. I appreciate it. Thank you. And you know what? I wonder, so Project 2025 views all of government through a business and economic lens. It commoditizes service agencies and even the development of our children themselves. Can you talk about these suggestions that a market mindset drives and how these affect children or programs that serve them? So, for example, the document discusses moving programs in the Department of Education Office of Post-Secondary Education and Student Loans. It wants to move these to the Department of Labor, where growth and achievement or education, that is just not an issue. The benefit of these loans or the whole initiative is assessed from a labor productivity standpoint, not from the child's personal space. Or another example is, as you're talking, the converting of these federal Medicare funding to block grants, that kind of thing, it seems to me, is a market mindset. I guess this has been the conversation all along, but if there's any particular way you wish to help us understand that business orientation, I'd be interested. Dr. Ravitch?
You know, I think I hadn't really thought of the business orientation as much as I thought about the idea, which is very, I guess, it's not even old school Republican, it's just selfish. And that is that if you want an education, pay for it. If you want your kid to go to college, it's your problem. Pay for it. I am not gonna have my tax dollars go to something I don't believe in and that doesn't benefit me. And what happens to your kid is your problem. So I think I'm that used to be like the old, very going back way back to the Republican Party, pre-Franklin Roosevelt. They were against any form of federal assistance to anyone because that meant that we were paying for people to do things that didn't benefit us. So I think that this is a fundamental selfishness that does not recognize that we're all interrelated, that we're all intertwined, that we do things for our society that ultimately benefit all of us, but not personally. That by lifting up people out of poverty, it's good for all of us. But by helping kids get a decent education, it's good for all of us. And that this idea that I only pay for what benefits me directly is un-American, unsocial, undemocratic, very, very bad for society.
Thank you. I guess the way in which think of it is sometimes we look at, not sometimes, I would say all of this stuff has been looking at children as, packets that we need to train up to be good workers, good labor force. So moving it all into the labor department makes sense if we're all just little,
Future workers.
protected future workers instead of, for my children, and I assume everyone would want to do this. I'm trying to learn to raise human beings and citizens. They have their own needs, educational needs. They aren't, I mean, they turn out to be a packet of labor providing. That's the exchange of an economy, but they have an internal intrinsic right and a need. And that's what I see missing in a business mindset.
Yeah, well, I think that the business mindset here is really commodifying everything, including children. And it goes back to what I said was this very individualistic attitude that I'll pay for what's good for me, but not for anything and not for anybody else. If it's good for your children, it has nothing to do with me. If it raises up poor kids, that's not my problem. Not going to do it.
Right, right.
Yeah, no, and I agree. I think, and anything, well, it's an interesting thing. It kind of goes back to the other question around, the haves and the have-nots. And really, it's just greed at a certain level too, right? There's a greed at a certain level with, the charter school choice type of world where, oh yeah, we're going to teach our kids. But as soon as it turned into, and I think when Dave talked about managed care, we have these management companies now that run charter schools that are making millions and millions and billions of dollars, and it's not getting to our kids at all. And so that greed at that level convinces people at the next level, right, down, right, the people who want to be selfish, to continue to be that way or cultivate that in people. It's somehow you're getting, somebody's taking money from you. So there's a greed aspect to this, that when we talk about a free market, there is no free market. We have people who make money, people who work. That's really, and that gap is just getting larger and larger. And our kids are not numbers, and our kids are more than test scores. And we talk about that every single day. And when I'm in schools, I spent a whole day at UC Davis with a bunch of superintendents and teachers, and the dedication of these people that are out there to help our kids every day. And we all talk about that. But I think there's a greed at a certain level that is just, we're going to get what we can. It's the same thing with privatizing Medicare, privatizing federal loans. Those guys are seeing those billions of dollars and they want that money. That's all there is to it. They want that money, and they're going to make people who are not at their level feel like they're being robbed by helping someone else. So it really is a two-tiered issue. People being convinced that somehow I'm going to either get to that level, or I'm just going to be angry at other people and I'm not going to give them my money. And so it's pessimistic, but I think it really is the fact that we do not have a free market. And they do want to commodify our kids, or whatever the term is. But we're working. There's structural problems that we have to be able to deal with, and hopefully we'll get people with the strength and the courage to talk about those structural inequities that have been around for decades. This is nothing new. We just hope we can fight that and get the right people into place to make some changes, but it's not easy. And even in Congress, you know, the committee is what is it called, Diane? I know you know it's education and labor. We don't even have an education committee.
Yeah, it's
in
called
Con-
the help committee.
Yeah.
That's health, education, labor,
Yeah.
and whatever HELP.
Yeah.
Whatever the P stands for, I can't remember.
Yeah. So we don't even have something dedicated to education itself in our own Congress. So what does that say? How does that speak to the importance?
Thank you. Mr. Jones?
Well, I agree with everything that Diane and Mary said. I guess one thing I just remind folks, and this is a bit of historical irony, you know, the Affordable Care Act is a market-based approach, which was first proposed and implemented by Mitt Romney when he was governor of Massachusetts. And it's interesting to see how far to the right the Republican Party has gone, to a point where they want to undermine, you know, not only a critically needed public-based approach to providing health care, which fills a huge gap where the private sector won't fill, right, which is what Medicaid and Medicare do in large measure, but they also want to gut the market-based approach, which is the Affordable Care Act. And so while they dress themselves up in free market, laissez-faire rhetoric and arguments, what you have to conclude from that is that what they're really about is trying to undermine anything that would help people in need. And they dress it up in free market arguments and, you know, arguments about the market being better, which we know, of course, you know, markets fail in various ways and aren't able to provide public goods and public benefits in the way that the public sector can and must. But even aspects of meeting need through market-based reforms like the Affordable Care Act, they're trying to gut as well. So, you know, I think fundamentally what it's about is trying to maximize benefits for a few, to maximize profits for a few. So it's a handful of corporations and a handful of wealthy individuals and the folks around them that benefit, and everybody else loses. And I think that's really what's at the heart of this, despite all of the rhetoric around how the market performs better than the public sector.
Yeah, thank you. So I don't mean to limit this to be, you know, back and forth form. If you have things to say directly to one another or a way to discuss this, please, you know, just hop in. So I'll pause and ask if that is.
Yeah, I'll hop in, Sarah, and say that I certainly agree with Dave Jones that what they're really after is killing any program that helps the needy. I mean, it's as simple as that. And they figure that they will dramatically lower their taxes. So ProPublica has an article up a couple of days ago about two Texas billionaires who made their billions in the oil business, and they're trying to kill public education, period. And they want everybody to become white Christian nationalists. You know, we're in a crazy time in our country, and I think someday, and I probably won't be around to see it, but someday we'll look back and say, this period of time, the Trump era, this unbridled greed, and the white Christian nationalism that seeks to take away everyone else's rights, that this would like the McCarthy era, not in the same things, but it will be something that we'll talk about as a historical phenomenon, this horrible period we're in. And we have to look at it that way. I don't believe, unless Trump should win the election, God forbid, I don't believe this is a lasting thing, because ultimately it's crazy and it's so mean-spirited. And I think better of the American people than believe that they would return this convicted felon to the White House. He's running solely to stay out of prison, and I think that he has to lose and be held accountable for his behavior 4 years ago. But the main thing I want to emphasize is that it's mean-spirited. It's mean and selfish and greedy, all of those things. And we have to make sure that it gets beaten.
One of a question that came from participant Tom Morton in the chat has to do with this mean-spiritedness that's directed at LGBTQ policies, but they're very clever about masking these in verbiage and marketed verbiage that works well, calling things parental rights. I mean, this seems to be the way it's done, right? Is to find a kernel of truth and find the wording, the labels that work across the board and co-opt things in that way. So parental rights is a good thing, but how you center that matters. And the way it is then being used for this mean-spirited and LGBTQ, pummeling is really something. So Mr. Morton was wondering if there's any advice from you all how to counter this. And like I would say, again, in our goal to be practical on the doorstep, what would you say in 8 words that could call attention to this mean-spiritedness and to the jeopardy to our children, regardless of how they identify? I'd love to hear anyone to hop in.
I think that we have to identify the parental rights movement with Moms for Liberty. And in truth, they don't represent liberty for anybody but themselves, because their real goal is to take away everyone else's liberty. And I think that we have to appeal to a sense of tolerance, that I'm not here to tell you what to do with your children, and you shouldn't be here to tell me what to do with my children. Just, leave our kids alone, because what's behind this parental rights movement is it's hypocrisy. As we know, one of the founders of Moms for Liberty was found engaged in a 3-way behavior. The leading advocate for school choice, Corey DeAngelis, just had his own scandal when it was revealed through the research of a right-wing group that he had been a gay porn star before he became a right-wing voucher pusher. I mean, it goes on and on. And I think that we should respect that other parents have different views, and we should not support any laws that take away the rights of some parents because other parents want to control them.
Well said. Other thoughts?
Dave, you go.
No, I have nothing to add to what Diane just so eloquently put forth. I think that's terrific. I agree.
Yeah, I think that's really, I think she said it very, very well. The lives of our kids are at risk when we do this kind of say these things. And I think it's parents should have the choice. And parents have the choice to do what they want with their kids, but not to this extent that they can harm them. I think we just go round and round because I think it's just so crazy for me, and every day we're dealing with it. So I did put in the chat a little bit back a press release that we put out around the Safety Act, that maybe you can pull some words out of that and some quotes from the state superintendent and use those words to help at the door, to kind of help with any kind of messaging you may have to have at the door, to kind of convince parents of how really just dangerous this is for the future of our country and for the future of our kids in so many ways.
Well, there is Tim Walz's 5-word expression: mind your own damn business.
Perfect. Exactly.
Leave my kids alone. You do what you want with your kids, and I'll do what I want with my kids.
Yeah.
And my mother used to tell me when I was driving, you just take care of yourself, as I was excoriating others on the road. But one way in which, I mean, when we're talking about these huge sums that the federal government is able to help us, it does blow back in ways that you can't take care of your own. If you have a child with special needs, these are, rare and expensive and specialized conditions. I don't know how to deal with that, and no random parent will. And this is one of the things that society affords us, is the ability to professionalize people and specialize and learn how to deal with stuff that not everybody can do. So sustaining equity with full funding of IDEA, is that how we pronounce it, rather than idea, is extremely important. I don't know if our panelists have ideas, no pun intended, about that, but also another threat here is, in the same manner as these business ideology, is the collapse of the maxim to keep separate church and state, to keep personal, convictions and hearts and feelings out of things, but to be a little bit more evidence-driven, evidence-based, and, as you say, not so selfish. How would you educate, how can we help educate our neighbors to these things and maybe learn to grow a coalition around them, because that's necessary when we're talking about rare conditions and the rest? Any ideas on that, any of you?
I think from the start of the pandemic, we saw a war on science, and Trump encouraged this. I mean, on the one hand, he put a lot of money into developing vaccines. He should have called it the Trump vaccine, and I guess he wouldn't have supported it unless he was making a profit personally. But if he'd called it the Trump vaccine, it might have been a good thing to take it. But he began with his attacks on Dr. Fauci and on everyone who was an expert in science and medicine, disparaging their views and substituting his own, all of which were stupid and horrible. And he's encouraged ordinary parents and ordinary people to think that the experts actually don't know anything. And this is a terrible thing in an advanced society like ours, to have people believing that medicine and science have nothing to offer them because the folk wisdom is far better. So I think we really have to do a job in restoring not belief in expertise, but understanding that expertise is better than ignorance. It's like the attack on education. I mean, I see the whole voucher movement, the idea that the public should be paying for religious schools where kids are indoctrinated, that the public should be paying for homeschooling where the kids frequently don't get any education. This is all a move to destroy education, period, and to make sure that only those people with money can make sure that their kids get a real education. It's very alarming for the future of our country. And it's one of the reasons why I'm a very strong supporter of public education. I support choice, but I think if you make a choice to leave the public system, you pay for it yourself. What I'm opposed to is the idea that the public should pay for people's private choices.
I'll say ditto.
Yeah, ditto. I guess the only thing I would add is that maybe trying to close with some hope. I think, first of all, we have a terrific opportunity in these swing states to communicate directly with voters and link up and connect the dots about how a Trump administration is going to be so very, very harmful to them personally, to their families, and to their communities. And we need to redouble our efforts to connect those dots. And people can be persuaded. I mean, if you step back a second and look at the history of the Affordable Care Act, for example, where there were a number of states that decided to opt out entirely, and so folks in that state had to go to the federal exchange. Over time, more states have created their own health benefits exchange. And perhaps even more importantly, as a result of the success of voter ballot initiatives in a number of red states, where the red state legislature and red state governor decided not to opt into Medicaid expansion, advocacy groups, including labor and teachers and progressives and others, put on the ballot measures that would require the state to opt into Medicaid expansion, and many of those were successful, right? So what I draw from that is that there's still hope, that people can be persuaded, that you can make the case, and we've just got to redouble our efforts to do so. And I'm really appreciative to the California Democratic Party Children's Caucus for convening this forum, for the opportunity for us to talk about the ways in which Project 2025 is so terrible for children, children's health, children's education, and to help arm folks that are going to be going to the doors with some real information about concrete ways in which this is going to be a bad thing and why people should vote against Trump.
Yeah, thank you. It's nice.
Oh, I just ditto everything. I think Dave ended on there's hope. I think, keep hope alive here. We can do this. We just all have to be very focused on what we're going to say. And again, politics are local for those of you that are not going out of state, or just vote at least, and then go out of state. That's okay. Just make sure you get people to vote. Vote for school board, vote for your city council, vote for your supervisors. And in some ways, we're in California. We're a little, we at least, I'm in the Bay Area, so I'm in a total bubble, right? Dave, we're just kind of like here in Northern California. So it's kind of a bubble for us. But, I'm just as concerned for the people in Mississippi and Louisiana and South and North Carolina that are underwater because of the lack of infrastructure and lack of care of their own states to take care of them and build what they needed to be able to deal with this, or their lack of belief in climate change, right? That is causing these things. So I think we have to care about everybody outside of ourselves. We have to be able to just think that way. So I'm hopeful that we can pull this off. And I mean, to Diane's, but I think it's even crazy that we're even in this situation, that we're even somehow even neck and neck in the polls with a convicted felon who says crazy things like literally every day, is something that I would think Saturday Night Live can't even make up, right? It's just insane to me to think we are here. And hopefully I'm just praying that all the polls are just wrong and people are just lying, because I just don't trust these things. But get out there and do what we can. Like this election is going to be, if it goes the wrong way, Diane's hopeful that it will go the right way and this can go down as a blip in history. But if he wins, this is not a blip. This is so dangerous for this country and the future of our kids. That's all I have to say.
I'm sorry. No, I hear you. And it is mystifying how we could be here, but I live with two 20-somethings and their friends. And the fact of the matter is that more people didn't vote at all than voted for either of the particular parties in the last election. So I wonder if we could end on, or I see Matthew have his hand up, but I'm concerned we're just a couple minutes away, but just an elevator pitch for our youth, for their 20-somethings. How can you not see this? What to say? Any ideas?
Gosh, I keep thinking the elevator pitch is that we want to be a better society. We want to be a country that meets up to our own ideals, and that whereas we've always seen ourselves as a light to the nations, we're going to a very dark place if we follow the advice of Project 2025. Having a man as morally decrepit as Donald Trump as president, having a man as a shapeshifter like J.D. Vance as vice president, poised to take Trump's place if Trump should die in office, it would be the end of seeing ourselves as a nation that others should emulate. We would certainly lose our right to tell anybody else that they should try to be like us.
Well, Sarah, I think part of that problem is they live in California and they live in a bubble that could burst. And so for me, it's always, my kids were always, my daughters were raised, very politically active. So they kind of knew the importance, and I forced them to, I didn't have to force them. They were excited to vote their very first time and continue to vote. But I think, the urgency with young people, I think, is going to be around what is the particular thing, unless they are not interested in climate change, if they are not protecting their own they're going to have to be a little bit selfish, and we need to bring that out for them. Like, what do you care about? What are you worried about? Now, if they're not worried about anything, I don't really know what to say about that. But if they can't look outside themselves or even within themselves, this election really is about their futures. This is not about my future. I'm old. I got a house. I got kids. I got a job. It's okay. I'm really worried about the young people and their futures, and if they'll ever be able to attain anything that we had when I was growing up, right? And so the risks to them, I think we have to go back and talk about that. Like, what really matters to them. I just talk about, climate change is going to get worse. Reproductive rights are at risk. Hate crimes against vulnerable communities are going to continue. Worker rights are going to erode, and safety from gun violence at schools are just going to worsen. under this administration. And they, if they're young, depending on how old they are, something is going to click. We just need to, again, just like I said at the door, we need to know who we're talking to, and we need to be able to hit on something that really matters to them. And that's the only way we're going to break through to get them to understand how critical. And if they can even look at what's happening in other states or even within other, districts within California, I think that would wake some people up, and young people do need to care. I think we need to figure out what they care about.
Well, I think you said it very well, Mary. And I want to say before this thing ends that I'm very happy to have met both Mary and Dave. And I feel that California is safe, even if the nation isn't. Although a lot of damage could be done, as Dave pointed out, not only to California, but to every state. If these two, I was going to say fascists, but maybe that's not the right word, clowns are elected. So the stakes are very high. They're high for everyone, certainly high for young people, because as you said, it's the world they're going to inherit. Climate change will affect them. And we have a man running for office who doesn't believe that climate change matters, that it exists. He says it's a hoax. He still says it's a hoax. And we can't go that way.
Let me hop in before I invite Mr. Jones and just say that I'm mindful of people's times. It's 10:02. But we have apparently many questions in the chat. I don't know if any of our panelists are able or willing to stay another 15 minutes. Is that doable, or got to hit the road to Nevada?
Yeah, I could try to stay a little bit, but I also want to make sure I don't miss the Canvas training in Reno.
I
So.
understand.
But I've done it before, so I guess I'd be okay.
Okay, Matthew, do you want to maybe run those down quickly? But I think that if you should feel free to say, that bus is leaving, I got to catch it. Is that all right? And I want to, so let me have this very soft closing, and thank you so much, because I think you have armed us very well, and we will put this the video of this up online, and I know I'm going to keep going back and referring to it and writing things down, because brevity is not my strong point, and it's helpful to hear these talking points. So even Matthew, if you want to even call out the subjects of these kind of questions people have, then we know they're out there and can refer back or think about them. Thank
So
you.
the question for Dave is about the way we do Medi-Cal in California. Is a target of it the fact that we cover undocumented people? We got several questions about that. Thank you.
Yes, so we've made the choice in California to cover first undocumented kids and then successive age cohorts of undocumented persons. And the way we fund that is 100% through state funding, because the federal Medicaid program won't share in the costs of covering undocumented persons. And however, our ability to do that is in part because we're getting $85 billion a year to cover a substantial portion of the rest of the Medicaid / Medi-Cal population. And if that were to be capped as Project 2025 proposes, and maybe even halved, we'd lose about $42.5 billion, which we don't have lying around, in seat cushions, right? So that would put enormous pressure on California's ability to continue to cover undocumented persons, and maybe even make it impossible, because we'd end up having to backfill the lost federal funds for the main Medicaid Medi-Cal program. And as well, as I said earlier, it would also pit education funding against healthcare funding, because now you'd find a Medicaid Medi-Cal program, $42.5 billion short, and a finite amount of state budget dollars, which have to be deployed between education and healthcare. So it's bad all the way around. I mean, I think Project 2025, and then the other aspect of Project 2025 is the suggestion that whatever's left of federal Medicaid funding would be conditioned on states not doing stuff like, wait for it, covering undocumented persons, or providing assistance to Planned Parenthood, or requiring that private health insurers cover reproductive health and abortion services. So they basically are utilizing, cutting the amount of federal funding that has implications, and then conditioning the available federal funding, all of which would be very bad for California's ability to continue to sustain providing assistance to undocumented persons.
Thank you. For Mary, the question was, would Project 2025 limit California's cultural studies programs, the California Indian Education Act, where we're doing things in the classroom to teach accurate history? There was a question about that.
Well, we do have, it would be hard for me to tell if what they could really do. We do have local control in our state. We've already put in our own state laws that we have a history science, a history framework, an ethnic studies model curriculum. And so I'm really not sure how much they could really do, but what they could do is they could have school board members, right, who would adopt curriculum and reject curriculum that would be able to talk about cultural diversity and about kids, the real backgrounds and history of this country and how it has treated certain populations. Now, a school board might be able to adopt something like that, but we have put some laws in place around book banning, curriculum adoption, where we've hired investigators for the first time ever within the Department of Ed to look at these kinds of things. I'm not sure if they could really get their hands that deep into our school districts. And I don't know if Abba is still on here, who's with a principal at a school district, as a matter of fact. But I think, they could try and they could sue us. My fear is that we also have an activist Supreme Court that would start ruling on these types of things as well, which would force us to have to change some of the things we do. And so there's a real threat there. Because I think we do have a pretty fair level of what we are teaching kids. It can always be better, but I'm not sure how far they could get their hands into that because they are suing. We are being sued by school districts, and we're suing school districts as well. So we're seeing how that's all going to work out and how far they can actually get with being able to kind of censor school books and curriculum.
And the last question is for Diane about what would happen with higher education and public higher education, as well as the accreditation bodies. If you have any question about that.
Well, what I read in Project 2025 is they want to cut student aid. I mean, basically what they're after is both to control ideologically and to, as the Republicans have done in certain states, but also to make sure that the federal government gets off the hook for student aid. And so they're going to push that back onto the states, and they're hoping that it goes away because they don't think anyone should go to college unless they can pay for it.
They also seem to be allergic to accreditation agencies. I mean, it's regulation, which is a no-go.
Yeah, they don't like regulation of any kind. And, you take that into the environmental area. They don't like regulation of the environment. They don't like regulation of guns. I mean, you just go all through the different subject areas and they want to free them from control.
Yeah, I think that the statement of federalism and states' rights is really sort of a proxy statement for no regulation, leave us alone. We think if we delay and push it off to the states, then it won't be an issue. But as has been pointed out, control that they wish for from a federal or other level is fine. So it's other people's regulation. That's the issue.
Well, I think what they're counting on is the fact that these days, I think 26 states are red states, and they're so gerrymandered that they're not going to be dislodged. So that even in a state where a Democrat wins the governorship, like North Carolina, the legislature is locked in. You have Democrats in some states with 50% of the registration and 32% of the seats in the legislature. So they're very happy to have the legislatures make decisions because they know it will be against any regulation or control.
I just took the best 3 questions, one for each person. So that's it. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you to everyone so much. If there are additional questions, can I toss them your way and maybe we'll share them back?
Sure.
Very
Sure.
appreciative. If I could do this, I don't seem to be young enough to do this. I'd make a heart. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. And
Thank you.
thank you, Mary and Dave.
Thank
Really
you, Dave and Diane. So great to
conversation.
be on with you. Thank you. Take care.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone.
It
Thanks,
was a real treat.
Caucus.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Thank
Thanks, everyone.
you.
Bye-bye now.
Bye. Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Take care, everyone.
Mm.